Hi, I'm Rick. Welcome to Elbow Shots.
Today we're going to be doing a subtop, and then I'm going to show you how I put on a crescent edge, which is also called a bullnose edge. I'll take you through this project from beginning to end. You'll get to spend 2 days with me on the job in less than half an hour.
Let's go take a look.
Here's a shot of another laminate counter with a crescent edge that I did a couple of months ago, with a standard scribed-in backsplash with cap metal. Notice how the veins of the marble flow down from the left corner of the backsplash and roll over the edge of the countertop. When installing a crescent edge or a beveled edge, it is essential for the subtops to be flat and square. These types of edges allow very little margin of error. Now here's an example of what not to do. I came across this mess when I was there to install the flooring. These edges are grossly overfiled. Thick dark lines on the edges are the opposite of what we want. We want a finished product that looks like a slab of stone, whether it's marble or granite. So in today's video, I'm going to show you the steps I took on this job to achieve that outcome. The first thing I want to check is how flat the subtops will be. The cabinets themselves are level, but the ledgers along the wall need a little help from some shims. One strip of laminate is enough to come up to level at one point. Back in the corner along this wall, it drops down a little more. One strip isn't quite enough, but a second piece gets us to level. Let's see how that works with the other set of cabinets. Nice. The corner is now level with the cabinets on either side of it, and the cabinets are level. Since we want as much support as we can get, let's see what a piece of vinyl plank does for it. It is the perfect thickness for this step down, and we're still level on the left. I can rip down a 3/4 inch strip on my table saw. That ledger is now level with the cabinets on the back wall. It's also level with the cabinets on the left. We just need to shim it up a little in between. This strip has a little bow to it, and so does the wall, so I'll just flip it over so they're bowing the same way. Now the cabinets are level, and the ledgers are level with the cabinets. To do this job, we have 3 sheets of 25 inch by 97 inch, 3/4 inch industrial grade particle board from a locally owned lumberyard. The long leg of the L-shaped cabinet is 96 1/4, and it's 51 across the back. The one long leg that I'll need is 8 foot 7 1/2. Here, an 8-footer for an 8-footer is a no-brainer, so let's start with that. First, we need to determine where we want the edge to finish, taking into consideration the thickness of the doors and drawers, the thickness of the self-edge substrate, and the final position of the crescent edge. We can determine how much we need to remove from the deck material. What I need is to take off about 3/4 inch, so I'll use this block of wood to scribe a line that follows the contour of the wall. After I trim the back edge, I see that I need to trim about 5/8 off the end. So the factory outside corner is straight and square, so I'm going to leave it that way and make my cut at the wall. I just want to make sure the cabinets are covered everywhere. Instead of using a block, I'm going to mark it at 2 points measured from the wall and draw a cut line. With the first piece fitted, let's hop over to the other side of the kitchen. The sink cabinet is level, and it's level to the ledger on the other side of the dishwasher. When we toss a slab up there, we can see that it's a little short on one end. I have this and then another 8-foot piece to fill in the blanks. So let's see what our balance is from the L countertop. Now before I cut the second leg of this countertop, I want to double check and make sure the first piece is everything I want from it. The substrate I use for the self edge is a 1/2 by 1 3/8 bullnosed stop. It's a hemlock trim stored indoors that is usually very straight, which gives us a clean base for a clean finished product. It's called stop because it's part of the door jamb that stops the door from swinging past closed. One of its edges is bullnose. I put that part on the bottom at the back. I want to use factory edges for my finished edges because they're straighter than I can cut them with a skill saw. I use the cut edge for my seam. Now this seam has a cabinet rib under the middle area, which is enough to give it support. The cabinet depth is the same as the first side, so I'll use the same block. What I should have done before I scribed it in is to check to make sure these two front edges are square to each other. I can eliminate a lot of fuss by making sure this inside corner is square. Fortunately, it is good. Now back to the sink counter. I know I want a factory edge on the end of this countertop, so I slide this piece down in position to be the end. Then I bring in the cutoff piece from the other counter to see where it falls. I wanted the joint to be somewhere in this area, so this is good. I'll explain why in a minute. The cut edge is against the wall, so I trace a silhouette line along the factory edge of the top piece onto the bottom piece. Now, this is a good place for the joint in the subtop because one of my pieces is already cut, and it is far enough away from the sink cutout to make a strong joint. Just to the right of the sink here, there are double ribs to nail to. That will really help to anchor this build. I use the same block to scribe in these sheets. Now for the dry fit. Push this back over a little. Before I go any further, I want to get my sink cut out. First, I locate the center of the sink cabinet and mark the center line for the sink. I don't have a template for this sink, so I'll get the sink into position, mark the outline, and then I can measure the lip to mark the cut line with a straight edge. I have the sink cutout marked. I also want to cut my cleat to length while I'm out there. I marked it about 1/4 to 1/2 inch short to allow me to shift it easily. I make the long straight cuts for the sink outside to minimize dust in the kitchen. With the corners not cut, it can be carried short distances if you're careful. Just don't handle it by the thin parts. I'm going to cleat these two pieces together now. I want the screw to fit snugly, but I don't want it to bind on the top piece. That way it'll pull the cleat up tight. We don't want any screw heads sticking up, so we get a drill bit that's slightly bigger than the screw head, like 3/8 or half, and cut a countersink hole. Short bursts can help keep that big bit from grabbing the wood and boring a wormhole through your countertop. And I just hold the cleat up in the middle where I can hand clamp it to get the first screw in. I want to make sure the two tops are flush at this point. This first screw started pushing and shifting the countertop, so I stop and back it off a little. By putting the other screws in first, I can better secure the cleat so that it will be more stable when I come back to this one. Then retorque as needed. We're going to need a ledger here behind the dishwasher. I'm switching to a longer nail because I need to get through the 3/4 inch ledger and the 1/2 inch sheetrock to get into the framing. Just slide the top out of the way and shoot a couple of nails into the studs. I was able to get a couple into the stud that the electrical box is secured to and angled a couple into the corner. Sometimes I will mark where the cabinet ribs are. It makes it so much easier to see where they are when I'm nailing. I'm using 1.5" 16 gauge finish nails spaced about 8 inches apart. I angle the nailer slightly to keep the nails from blowing out the sides and the faces of the cabinets. With the subtop secured, I run a bead of wood glue on the self-edge substrate. Well, that was a waste of good time and glue. I forgot to flip it, so I put the glue on the wrong side. The radius edge would end up facing out. We don't want that. So I cleaned the glue off and put a new bead along the proper edge with the radius edge on the bottom at the back. Again, I'm using 1.5" 16 gauge finish nails spaced about 8 inches apart. Back to the other side of the kitchen. We want this end piece to be flush with the outside corner. I would rather have a slight gap at the wall than to be short out here, which would create a weak point under the crescent edge miter. The nail pushed the critical end of this piece, the outside corner, up a little. That can happen because the glue provided lubricant between the two pieces of wood. When the first nail was shot in, it slipped on the wet glue. I'll finish nailing it, tap it down with a hammer, and shoot another nail in there to hold it in place till the glue dries. Mushing and sliding the piece helps spread the glue. I overlap the corners of my substrate because I want solid wood, not a miter joint under the crescent edge miter. Then I can nail with 8-inch spacing. Back over to finish the sink cutout. Notice that I have screws angled into the sink cutout to keep it from dropping down into the sink cabinet, possibly damaging the plumbing below. Haha! That's what happens when you don't get the screws in deep enough. I rushed that part. Didn't go get the right tool for the job. My impact driver would have set those screws deep enough to hold. Fortunately, no damage resulted from this minor mishap. Now to dry fit the sink. On this end of the countertop, we don't want to extend the top into the stove space. The upper cabinets are aligned with the base cabinet and the range hood is already installed. Extending the countertop will push the stove over too far. Same is true over here where the refrigerator will be. Now that the subtops are on and the self-edge substrate is secured, I go over all of my joints with a belt sander. Because I don't want to crowd the appliances, I just put a laminate self-edge on those ends. After I get the self-edge on, I file it flush. Did I mention how sharp this stuff is? Even after 40 years of working with it, I still get cut. I was rolling this piece in place when I slipped a little and shaved some skin off. Ow. Even though I went over this with a belt sander, I like to hit it with a file to make sure the deck is flat, especially along the edge. Now I can scribe in the decks. If you want to see this step in more detail, click on the link above to see the basic installation video. I have a pivot point here along the back wall. Pivot points can cause problems during assembly. I want to cut that out before I try to put the laminate on with glue. I'll scribe it in again to remove that portion. Cutting out this section from here to here solves the problem. Now the back edge of the laminate is keyed to the shape of the wall. I can mark the underneath side of the laminate at the corner for orientation. I also marked the sink cutout. It doesn't need any adhesive in that area. Walls are not usually straight, and these are certainly no exception. My pen fell off the edge over on this other side here because the wall has a wow in it. It'll probably still be close enough. We'll see. Alright, fitting it back. There's still a little bit of a gap on the left side, but that will easily be covered with a backsplash. Even if it was only getting caulked in, it would still be close enough. Most of the time when I'm spreading glue on top of a finished floor, I'll put scraps under the edges to keep from getting glue everywhere. If I don't have scraps, I'll lift the edge to cut it in, then spread up to it. For a crescent edge, I want to set my router bit a little deeper. I only want the cutter set for the thickness of the laminate when I'm trimming to another piece of laminate, but setting the bit a little deeper helps make sure the edge is cut cleanly. I also want to make sure that I don't set it so that the roller bearing is lined up with the nail holes in the self edge. The roller bearing can dip into those nail holes and overcut the laminate deck. Not a lot, but it doesn't take much to mess up your edge. There'll be a little dip gap in the deck. And now that this other side is dry, I'll get it in place. I make sure it isn't going to hang up on the wall anywhere. I usually pull the slats out of the corner first. That way I can work any fullness away from the corner out to the ends. If the edge of the laminate does happen to get hung up a little on the wall, you can fix that with a block of wood and hammer. Remember that pesky pivot point on the sink counter? That's right about where I started the retrim cut. This is just for slight hang-ups. Hopefully you will do a good enough job with fitting an assembly that you won't have any major hang-ups. When I'm trimming the edge, I have my router bit set deep, as I said before. I stop before I get to the end because I want to reset the depth of my router. But before I do that, I'm going to cut out the sinkhole. Then I can reset and trim the end. I didn't have it set quite deep enough. There we go. I want to keep the front edge as straight as possible, so I'm just going to deburr the edge with a lineal stroke using the fine side of the file. If I need to remove a little more, I can turn my file perpendicular to the edge to clean up any slight deviations. Then I can blend it with a long stroke. Now I can dry fit the crescent edge. To make it easier to handle, I cut it to a rough length first, leaving myself a little bit to retrim to a finished length.
Videotaping yourself doing floor.
Should.
What I normally do is use a piece of blue tape to hold up the other end of long pieces. I did not do that this time. The tension against the wall was enough to hold it up until I got distracted talking to the homeowner, who was suggesting that I film myself installing flooring. I have been doing that, and I'll be getting those videos out soon. Fortunately, it didn't get damaged when the edging hit the floor. The bottom edge is squared off to make it safer to work with and around. The squared edge also makes it less susceptible to damage from bumps like that. When these first came out, they didn't have a squared off bottom edge. It was sharp on both sides. When I'm dry fitting, I want any gaps or lines to disappear. As much as possible, I want the deck and the edge to look like a one-piece slab. When I find an area that won't close with a little pressure, I'll blend that area with a file, just enough to close the gap. I don't want to overwork it. That could make things worse. Blue painter's tape is the system I use for clamping the glued-on edge. I put most of the strips on before I spread the glue. Then I can pull them back out of the way. I run a couple of beads of glue, one near the top and the other near the bottom. Then I use a disposable spatula that I made from a laminate scrap to spread the glue evenly. What do you do with all the excess glue? I'll scrape it off onto the back of my sink cutout. I work quickly to keep my glue from drying out. I want the spread to be as even as possible, making sure the top edge is completely covered. Here's where having the tape in place really makes a difference. One piece pulled down will hold that end up while I secure the rest of the edging. I don't want to bulldoze my glue off with the bullnose, so I'll pull the edging away, lift it, and then reapply. Now I can make sure this end is flush and looking good. Then I can go down the line and secure the edge with the blue painter's clamps. Skip a couple to get the crescent edge on plane in the middle, then come back through to make finer adjustments. I'm stretching the tape while at the same time pressing in on the edging to keep everything tight. I want the glue to ooze up a little. It helps make the edge a little more water resistant. Whoop, don't know my own strength. I'll come back to that. Now I can go back through and reinforce any areas that need it, or fix the one I tore. Over here we have an outside corner. I have this cut off from the first piece. Before I cut my miter, I want to make sure it fits along my seam edge and against the wall. I didn't get my self-edge substrate perfectly flush on the end here, so I'll have to clean it up with a file before I can get a good corner. This end against the wall is still rough because I didn't even finish filing it before. It's not a problem. I'll just take care of that now. Okay, it's pretty good on the ends now, but in the middle, the substrates are bumping against each other, preventing the laminate from closing up. What I'm showing here is a high-risk move. You could easily damage the delicate top edge. For most people, it would be better to take a little more time and work it out of the hemlock at the countertop. That's where the real problem is. Remember when I tweaked the substrate in through here? It didn't seem like much at a time. It is a little distortion is all. Having said that, the backing for the crescent edge is a soft, medium density fiberboard. It's faster and easier to machine than the hemlock. Either way, it would likely be safer to use sandpaper on a block of wood. With the piece fitted, I'm ready to cut my miter. I mark it at the edge of the laminate, a hair on the long side, because it's easier to cut it a little shorter than it is to cut it a little longer. Although the bottom of the edging is cut square, please remember this stuff is razor sharp. It may look like I'm sliding my fingers along it. I'm actually being very careful not to touch the edge. Before I cut the other half of this outside corner, I want to make sure the other end of this edging is in a fixed position. I'll make up this inside corner first so I know I won't have to shift this piece. I'll use a couple of pieces of tape to hold it in position while I fit this shorter piece. I can adjust the first piece, and if needed, I can reapply the tape. This is why it's important to make sure the corner is flat and square. It makes it so much easier to fit these pieces. With the inside corner ready to go, I can mark and cut this one to length, flush with the end. Now I can make up the outside corner. Let's cut it to length and see how we did. All looks good through here. There is a little fullness that is pushing this corner apart. It looks like the end piece is too long. When I go to my cut station, I like to take a couple of pieces with me to make multiple cuts. I'm going to cut 2 different pieces while I'm over here. I use an 80-tooth carbide tip saw blade. It seems to make a fine enough cut for this edging. I don't know if I'd use fewer teeth, maybe more, but not fewer. Now here's a little trick I use when I just want to remove a hair's breadth. With the blade lowered, I butt the piece to the flat part of the blade, hold the piece in place, and raise the blade. The set of the teeth is slightly thicker than the body of the blade, and when it's spinning, it'll just take off a hair. When dry fitting, make sure all of the gaps close up with light pressure. I'm going to try an experiment here. I like to test new techniques. Since I already have all this tape on here, I'm going to see if I can hinge it over on the tape. So far so good. I'll go ahead and get the glue spread. Now when I tried to roll this back over, the delicate top edge hung up on the edge of the deck. So I put tension on the tape when applying it, so all of these pieces pulled on it. I can lift it up carefully to protect the edge. I pulled out on the top edge to keep it from hanging up on the laminate. I was able to get it in place without damage, but I don't think I'll try that again. Now I can go through and adjust the tape. Add a little more as needed to eliminate any cases of gaposis. This time I can apply the tape to the crescent edge and pull it towards the deck. Sometimes it helps to massage it together with my thumbs to help relieve the hydraulic pressure from the glue. Keep working it while the glue is still fluid. If that edge is sticking up at all, it can cut you. Remain very aware of that. I'm wiping glue residue off the top before I apply more tape. I should use a damp rag for that. It's safer and does a better job. Because the backing is very porous and will suck the moisture from the glue, a coat of glue on both faces of the miter will make the joint stronger. Once I get the end piece held in place with tape, I can make adjustments. I want to make sure my corner is tight and lined up correctly. Sometimes I need to pull a couple of pieces of tape to get it right, but this corner looks good with just one. While the glue is setting up, which takes about half an hour, I can start my cleanup. A little solvent to remove any of my pen marks. I can put away the tools that I know I'm done using. I can haul out large debris and vacuum out the corners. Now that the glue has had a chance to set up, I can remove the tape. First thing I like to do is rub the whole thing down with poly seam seal caulking to fill any slight gaps. Again, it would be much smarter to use a damp rag for this. Put retired socks back to work. Give them a sense of purpose. Laminate scraps make handy little soft edge scrapers because they are the same on the hardness scale as the laminate. I'm just skimming off the excess caulking here. I'll say it again, use a damp rag. Now to finish the edge. I'm using the fine side of my file to gently blend the two edges. I'm not doing much more than deburring the joint. I don't want to remove too much material. I want it to be smooth. Light touch. Also be aware of which piece is higher than the other so you know which direction to file. For safety reasons, you may want to spend a little time on the outside corners. They're at forehead height for some little ones and a hip dagger for some of us bigger ones. Just don't overfile your edges or you could end up looking like this. Use your instruments with care. Now what do you do with this raw end here? There isn't too much you can do with it. The appliances will conceal them from view, so we just want to seal them to keep out moisture, dirt, and grease. I use a little smear of caulking and clean it up so that it isn't smeared all over everything. Long, smooth, fluid strokes will get you the results that you want. Sometimes you may have to overfile the edge. You cannot leave a sharp edge where someone could cut themselves. You shouldn't have a problem if you make sure you apply the crescent edge at the right height. Take your time during assembly.
When you told me the story behind it, now I got it.
Yeah, now we'll both remember.
Let's take another look at that other countertop. The backsplash is a flat piece of laminate glued directly to the wall, scribe fit to the deck, caulked with silicone, and capped with aluminum. Sometimes you get really lucky with grain matching. This is gorgeous. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you learned something, please give this video a like, share it with a friend, or comment below. I love to hear your comments. Thanks. See y'all later. Unless it's a super sharp brand new blade. Then maybe. But I don't know. Are you good to go down to 60? Stop it.